A camera recovered from a sunken car plays the last recording of a missing family. The water gave it back. After 7 years of silence, the river coughed up the rusted shell of a Ford Explorer. And inside, a small plastic box that held the last moments of the Harrison family. It wasn't a miracle. It was a curse. Detective Miles Corbin felt the familiar acid churn in his gut as the winch groaned, straining to pull the SUV from the murky depths of the Skagit River. The vehicle breached the surface like a bloated corpse, shedding a cascade of brown water and trailing weeds like funeral ribbons. For 7 years, Liam and Sarah Harrison, along with their 6-year-old daughter, Luna, had been a ghost story. A local legend whispered among fishermen and late-night drinkers. A happy family, swallowed whole by the winding backroads of the Pacific Northwest. Now, here was their tomb. Miles watched from the muddy bank, his breath fogging in the crisp October air. The recovery team worked with a grim, practiced efficiency. Their faces impassive. They'd seen this before, but Miles hadn't. Not like this. He'd been a rookie when the Harrisons vanished. The case file, a mountain of dead ends and frantic, unanswered questions. It had haunted him, a constant low-grade hum of failure in the back of his mind. Anything, Miles? Sheriff Brody's voice was a low rumble beside him. Brody was a man carved from the local timber, weathered and sturdy. But his eyes held the same weary sadness that Miles felt. Just a car, so far, Miles said, his gaze fixed on the shattered driver's side window. Let's hope they're inside. Let's hope it was fast. It was a cold prayer, but the only one that made sense anymore. The alternative that they'd been taken, that their end had been slow and cruel, was a darkness he didn't want to face. Hours later, under the sterile, buzzing lights of the county morgue's examination bay, the real horror began. The bodies, or what was left of them, had been removed. The car's interior was a ruin of silt, decayed upholstery, and the mundane artifacts of a family's last day. A child's pink sneaker, a half-empty bag of apple slices, gone to black. Mush, a map of hiking trails. And then, a technician, a young kid named Evan with wide, perpetually startled eyes, called out, "Detective, you're gonna want to see this." Evan was holding a GoPro camera. It was caked in mud, but miraculously intact. Its tough plastic casing having protected its digital heart from the crushing pressure and the slow rot of the river. It had been found tucked into the side pocket of the passenger door, as if Sarah Harrison had set it there just for a moment. "Think there's anything on it?" Brody asked, stepping closer. The memory card looked sealed tight. "Could be," Evan said, his voice trembling slightly. "Could be the last thing they ever saw." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The last thing they saw, the final frame of 3 lives. They took the memory card to the station's small windowless tech room. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and ozone. Miles, Brody, and Evan huddled around a monitor, the silence broken only by the hum of the computer. Evan carefully inserted the card into a reader. A drive icon popped up on the screen. He clicked. A single video file. MP4. "It's dated the day they disappeared," Evan whispered. October 14th, 7 years ago. Miles's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The answer. The ghost story was about to give up its secrets. Play it. Evan's finger hovered over the mouse. He looked at Brody, then at Miles, seeking permission to open Pandora's box. Miles gave a sharp nod. The video flickered to life. The screen was filled with the face of a little girl. Her eyes a brilliant, startling blue, her blonde hair a wild halo around her head. She was laughing, a pure tinkling sound that felt like a punch to the gut. This was Luna Harrison, alive, vibrant. "Are you getting me, Mummy?" she chirped, her face so close to the lens that her features were distorted into a comical fisheye. The camera pulled back, and the viewpoint shifted. It was being held by someone in the passenger seat, Sarah. Her voice, warm and amused, came from behind the lens. "I'm getting you, sweet pea. Now turn around and look at the beautiful trees." The camera panned, and the interior of the Ford Explorer filled the screen. Liam was driving, his handsome face relaxed, a small smile playing on his lips, as he glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. He looked like a man without a care in the world. The car was moving along a winding, tree-lined road. Sunlight dappled through the canopy, painting shifting patterns on the dashboard. It was idyllic, painfully, heartbreakingly normal. "Where are we going, Daddy?" Luna asked, her voice now coming from the back seat. "To the secret waterfall, my little adventurer," Liam answered, his voice a gentle baritone. "The one from the storybooks, with the fairies. Maybe we'll have to be very quiet to see them." The scene was so peaceful, it felt like a violation to be watching it. Miles felt like a ghoul, a voyeur peering into a sacred, private moment. He could feel Brody's heavy presence beside him. The sheriff's breathing shallow. The video continued for another 10 minutes. They sang songs. Luna pointed out a deer on the side of the road. Sarah filmed Liam as he made a funny face. And his deep laughter filled the small car. It was a perfect family afternoon, a memory being carefully, lovingly preserved on a tiny digital card. And then, everything changed. The first sign of trouble was subtle. A flicker of movement in the side mirror. Liam's eyes darted to it, his smile tightening almost imperceptibly. "Who's that?" Sarah asked, her voice still light, but with a new questioning edge. She turned the camera to look out the back window. A dark green beat-up pickup truck was behind them, following too closely. "Just some local in a hurry," Liam said, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He sped up slightly. The pickup matched his speed. "He's right on our tail, Liam," Sarah said. The camera shook a little. "It's fine, sir, probably just wants to pass. I'll pull over when there's a spot." But there were no spots. The road was narrow, with a steep, wooded drop-off on one side and a sheer rock face on the other. The pickup truck loomed in the rear window, a predatory presence. The idyllic scene had curdled into something tense and menacing. "Daddy, that man is scaring me." Luna's small voice piped up from the back. "It's okay, sweetie." "Just a silly driver," Liam said, but his voice was strained. He was trying to project calm, but fear was bleeding through. Suddenly, the pickup swerved, its heavy bumper slamming into the rear of the Explorer. The camera jolted violently. Sarah cried out. Luna screamed, "What the hell?" Liam yelled, fighting for control of the wheel. The car fishtailed on the gravelly shoulder. The pickup hit them again, harder this time. The sound of crunching metal was sickeningly loud. The GoPro was now pointed at the floor, the screen a chaotic blur of motion, but the audio was perfectly, terrifyingly clear. "Liam, oh my God, Liam." Sarah's voice was a raw shriek of terror. "Hold on." Liam grunted, the sound of his strained breathing filling the speakers. Another impact, this one to the side. The world inside the car tilted crazily. Luna's screams were continuous now, a high, piercing wail of pure childhood terror that clawed at Miles's soul. "He's pushing us." Sarah screamed, "He's pushing us off the road." The sound of tires screeching, of metal grinding against rock. And then, a different sound. The horrifying, unmistakable pop and shatter of glass. The driver's side window. A new voice entered the recording. A man's voice, rough and guttural, shouting from right beside them. The words were indistinct, lost in the chaos, but the rage behind them was palpable. "Stop, please, just stop," Sarah begged, her voice dissolving into sobs. The final impact was catastrophic. A deafening roar of twisting metal, shattering glass, and the three of them screaming in unison. The camera's view spun wildly, a flash of green trees, a smear of blue sky, and then, a violent, churning explosion of brown and gray. The car was airborne. The audio became a vortex of sound, the rush of wind, the frantic, muffled screams, and then a final bone-jarring crunch as they hit the water. The screen went black for a second, then flickered back on, submerged. The only light was a pale greenish glow filtering from above. The interior of the car was filling with water at an alarming rate. Bubbles streamed from Sarah's mouth as she gasped, still holding the camera. Luna. Liam's voice was a desperate, gurgling shout. Get her out. Get Luna out. The camera whipped around. Liam was struggling with his seatbelt, his face a mask of primal panic. Water was already up to his chest. In the back, Luna was thrashing, her small hands beating against the window that wouldn't break. Sarah's hand, holding the GoPro, reached back. The lens focused on Luna's face, her eyes wide with a terror no child should ever know. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, bubbles escaping. I can't get her door open. Sarah's voice was a choked, watery sob. It's jammed. The window. Break the window. Liam roared, finally freeing himself. He lunged for the back seat, a desperate father trying to defy the laws of physics. Trying to hold back the river itself. The water was rising faster. Now, a murky, inexorable tide. The light from the surface was fading. The camera's view became a frantic, disoriented nightmare. A hand Liam's reaching for Luna. Sarah's panicked breathing, turning into choked, gurgling sounds. The heartbreaking, futile splashing of a little girl drowning. And then, through the chaos, the camera captured one last, chilling image. A face appeared outside the passenger window, looking in. It was a man's face, pale and distorted by the water, his features twisted into a grotesque mask of something. Not rage, not satisfaction. Something colder, emptier. His eyes were dark, hollow pits, and they stared directly into the lens for a fraction of a second. An image burned onto the memory card, an image burned into Miles's brain. The water inside. The car surged, slamming the GoPro against something hard. The screen filled with a final chaotic blur of brown silt and darkness. The last sound was a faint, gurgled whisper. It could have been, I love you. It could have been a prayer. Then, silence. The file ended. The three men in the room sat, in absolute, stunned stillness. The only sound was the hum of the computer, a sound that now seemed obscene, disrespectful. Evan was pale, his mouth hanging open. Sheriff Brody had his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking. Miles felt nothing. A vast, cold emptiness had opened up inside him. He stared at the blank monitor, but all he could see was that face. The face in the water. The ghost at the feast. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a tragic mistake on a winding road. This was an execution. They had been hunted. Forced off the road, watched as they drowned. He pushed himself away from the desk, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. He walked on unsteady legs to the small window, staring out at the quiet, sleeping town. The ghost story had a monster. And for 7 years, that monster had been walking free, living, breathing, while the Harrisons lay at the bottom of the river. Their final, terrified moments trapped in a tiny plastic box. The cliffhanger wasn't a question of what happened. The GoPro had shown them that in excruciating second-by-second detail. The cliffhanger was the face. A face with no name. A ghost who had to be given a form, a history, a reason. Miles felt a new, cold fire ignite in the pit of his stomach, burning away the shock, replacing it with a singular, unyielding purpose. He would find that face. He would drag that monster out of the shadows and into the light. The river had given back the Harrisons' tomb. Now, it was his job to give them justice. He turned back to the room. His expression hardened into a mask of grim resolve. Evan, he said, his voice low and steady, a blade being sharpened. Isolate that face. Clean it up. Run it against every database we have. DMV, criminal records, social media, everything. I want a name. I want it yesterday. The hunt had begun. Not for the missing, but for the man who had watched them die. The face in the water became Miles's obsession. Evan, the tech, managed to pull a surprisingly clear still frame from the chaotic final seconds of the video. The water distorted the features, pulling at the skin, widening the eyes into dark, cavernous pools, but the basic structure was there. A man, probably in his late 30s or early 40s at the time. A sharp jawline, a high forehead, thinning hair, but it was the eyes that held Miles captive. They were devoid of emotion, as flat and dead as a shark's. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was an extermination. The database searches came up empty. No matches in criminal records. No hits on DMV photos. The man was a ghost. A ghost who drove a dark green beat-up pickup truck. A truck that had likely been scrapped or repainted years ago. The case file, once a mountain, was now a single haunting image. To understand the monster, Miles knew he had to understand the victims. Liam and Sarah Harrison weren't just names on a missing persons report anymore. They were flesh and blood, their final terror laid bare. Who were they? Who would want to hunt them down on a quiet Sunday afternoon and watch their child drown? Liam Harrison had been an architect, a partner at a small boutique firm in Seattle. He was known for his innovative designs, his use of sustainable materials, and his quiet, intense focus. His partner, a man named Julian Croft, had been devastated by the disappearance. Miles had interviewed him 7 years ago and remembered a man hollowed out by grief. He decided to start there. Croft's office was in a sleek, modern building downtown. All glass and steel, a world away from the muddy riverbanks and winding country roads. Julian Croft himself had aged. The grief Miles remembered had settled into his features, carving permanent lines of sorrow around his eyes and mouth. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored grey suit, a stark contrast to Miles's own rumpled blazer. "Detective Corbin," Croft said, his handshake firm but cold. "It's been a long time. I heard they found the car. I can't say I'm surprised. I always knew it had to be the river." "We found more than the car, Mr. Croft," Miles said, keeping his voice even. He hadn't released any details about the GoPro to the public. As far as the world knew, it was a tragic accident. "I need to understand who Liam and Sarah were. Who were their friends, their enemies?" Croft gave a sad, tired smile. "Enemies? Liam didn't have enemies. He was the most decent man I've ever known. Passionate about his work, devoted to his family, people loved him." "No one is loved by everyone," Miles pressed. "Disgruntled clients. Business deals gone sour. He was a partner. There must have been pressure, competition." Julian stared out the large window overlooking the city. "The pressure was immense, always. We were working on the biggest project of our careers back then, the Blackwood Reserve, a massive multi-million-dollar eco-resort development up in the Cascades. It was Liam's baby, his design, his vision." "Blackwood Reserve," Miles repeated, the name jogging a memory. "That project was controversial, wasn't it? A lot of environmental opposition." "That's putting it mildly," Croft said, with a dry chuckle. "We had protesters chaining themselves to trees. Death threats spray-painted on our office doors. A group called Gaia's Sword was particularly zealous. They saw us as corporate monsters paving over paradise. A new avenue opened up, Equitsarisis. It fit the profile of rage, of a righteous, violent anger." "Did you ever identify any of these people? Did Liam ever have a direct confrontation?" "Dozens. Liam, bless his heart, always wanted to reason with them. He'd go out and talk to them, try to explain the sustainable aspects of the design, the low environmental impact. He thought he could win them over with logic." Croft shook his head. "He was naive. You can't reason with fanatics." There was one man in particular, their unofficial leader, a guy named Caleb Thorne. He and Liam had a few very heated arguments. Caleb Thorne, a name, a potential face. What did he look like? Miles asked, his pulse quickening. Wild Croft said. Long dark hair, a beard, intense eyes. Looked like he'd just walked out of the woods after a decade. He saw Liam as the devil incarnate. It wasn't a perfect match to the clean-shaven face in the water, but hair could be cut, beards shaved. The intensity, however, resonated. Next, Miles sought out Sarah's story. She had been a freelance journalist, specializing in long-form investigative pieces. Her best friend, a woman named Anya Sharma, was now a tenured professor at the University of Washington. Miles met her in a quiet campus cafe. The air filled with the scent of old books and espresso. Anya's eyes filled with tears the moment Miles mentioned Sarah's name. "I still can't believe she's gone," she whispered, twisting a napkin in her hands. "For 7 years, I held on to this tiny, stupid sliver of hope that she'd just run away, that she'd call me one day. Finding the car, it made it real." "I'm sorry for your loss, Ms. Sharma," Miles said gently. "I need to know what she was working on before she disappeared." Anya's expression shifted. The sadness was still there, but it was now laced with something else. Fear. She was working on something big, something that scared her. Scared her, how? She wouldn't tell me the specifics. She said it was safer if I didn't know. But it was about a man, a very powerful, very dangerous man. She called him the alchemist. The alchemist. Miles frowned. Why? It was her codename for him. She said he had a talent for making things disappear. Problems. People evidence. He worked for powerful people, cleaning up their messes. She'd stumbled onto his trail while investigating a financial scandal. She was convinced he was connected to something much darker, a whole network of corruption. This was a different path entirely. Not a wild-eyed environmentalist, but a cold, professional fixer. It felt closer to the dead-eyed stare from the GoPro. Did she have a name for this alchemist? Miles asked. Anya shook her head, her eyes wide. No, she never got a name. That's what was terrifying her. She was trying to unmask a ghost. She told me he knew she was looking for him. She said she felt like she was being watched. A few weeks before they disappeared, she told me she was thinking of dropping the story. She was afraid for Liam and Luna. Anya started to cry, silent tears tracking through her makeup. I told her to drop it. I begged her. I said no story was worth her life. She promised me she would. She promised. The words hung between them, a testament to a promise broken, or a threat that had moved too fast. Sarah Harrison hadn't been a passive victim. She'd been a hunter, just like Miles, and her prey had hunted her back. The final piece of the puzzle was the hidden witness. But who? The river was the only witness, and it kept its secrets well. Miles went back to the source. The car. It sat in the impound lot, a hollowed-out metal carcass. He spent hours inside, breathing in the faint, lingering smell of decay and river mud, trying to see what he'd missed. In the back, wedged deep down between the seat cushion and the frame, his fingers brushed against something small and hard. He pulled it out. It was a child's toy, a small hand-carved wooden bird. It was beautifully made, the wood smooth and worn, but it wasn't the bird that caught his attention. It was the tiny, almost invisible inscription burned into its base. A single letter. J. It meant nothing to him, but he bagged it anyway. Every detail mattered now. His investigation had split into two distinct, warring narratives. The first was Caleb Thorne, the eco-warrior, a man driven by righteous fury. The second was the alchemist, a shadowy fixer, a professional killer motivated by money and secrets. The face in the water could belong to either man, a fanatic or a professional. Rage or ice. He decided to pursue Thorne first. He was a known quantity, a name with a history. Miles found that after the Blackwood Reserve project stalled, following Liam's disappearance, Gaia's sword had faded into obscurity. Caleb Thorne had dropped off the map. A search of public records showed he'd inherited a plot of land from his family deep in the woods, not far from the very road where the Harrisons had met their end. Miles drove out there alone, the city shrinking in his rearview mirror, replaced by the towering silent pines of the Cascade foothills. The road narrowed, turning from pavement to gravel, then to a rutted dirt track. He found the property at the end of the track, marked by a faded no trespassing sign. A small rustic cabin sat in a clearing, smoke curling lazily from its stone chimney. As he got out of his car, the cabin door opened. A man stepped out onto the porch, holding a shotgun. He was older now, his long hair streaked with gray, his beard untamed, but the eyes were the same, burning with an intensity that could start fires. It was Caleb Thorne. That's far enough, Thorn called out, his voice a low growl. The shotgun was pointed not at Miles, but at the ground. A warning, not a direct threat. Caleb Thorn. Miles said, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. I'm Detective Corbin. I'd like to ask you a few questions about Liam Harrison. Thorn's face hardened. He spat on the ground. Harrison, the man who wanted to pave over God's country for a playground for the rich. I haven't thought about him in years. I think you have, Miles said, taking a slow step forward. I think you thought about him on October 14th, 7 years ago, when you followed his car down that old logging road. Thorn's knuckles whitened on the stock of the shotgun. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, Miles pressed, his voice like steel. I think you hated him. I think you hated what he represented. And I think you decided to play God yourself and wipe him off the face of the earth. Caleb Thorn stared at him, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The silence of the forest pressed in around them. For a moment, Miles was certain he had his man. The rage was there, simmering just below the surface. This was a man capable of violence. Then, Thorn did something unexpected. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You think I killed him? You cops are all the same. You see a man who lives by his own rules, who doesn't bow to your concrete world, and you assume he's a monster. He lowered the shotgun, leaning it against the porch railing. I hated what Harrison was doing. Yes, I fought him, I argued with him, but I didn't kill him. On the day he disappeared, I was 50 miles from here, chained to a bulldozer. I have 5 witnesses and an arrest record to prove it. Miles felt the theory disintegrate. He could check the alibi. If it was true, Caleb Thorn, the prime suspect, was a dead end. Then who did? Miles asked, the question raw. Thorn's expression changed. The anger faded, replaced by something that looked like pity. You're looking in the wrong place. Detective Liam Harrison wasn't the monster. He was just the architect. He was working for the real devil. Who? The man who bought the land. The man who was funding the whole damn thing. The man who stood to lose a fortune if the project was shut down by our protests. Thorn leaned forward, his intense eyes locking onto Miles's. His name is Julian Croft. The name hit Miles like a physical blow. Julian Croft, Liam's partner, the grieving friend, the man who had pointed him toward Thorn in the first place. It was a classic misdirection, a perfect, calculated move. Suddenly, the pieces began to shift, rearranging themselves into a new, horrific picture. Croft's feigned sadness, his quickness to offer up a convenient scapegoat, the project stalling after Liam's death, only for Croft to buy out Liam's share from his estate for a pittance, and, a few years later, restart a modified version of the project, making him a very wealthy man. And Sarah, the investigative journalist. What if the powerful, dangerous man she was investigating wasn't some shadowy alchemist from a financial scandal? What if he was much closer to home? What if she had discovered that her husband's partner, his best friend, was corrupt? That the Blackwood Reserve project was built on a foundation of dirty money and criminal connections? The motive was suddenly crystal clear. Liam and Sarah, together, were a threat. Liam, the honest architect, would have been appalled by any criminal dealings. Sarah, the tenacious journalist, would have exposed it all. They had to be silenced. Not by a wild-eyed fanatic, but by a cold, calculating businessman protecting his empire. A man who would hire a professional to make his problems disappear. The face in the water. It wasn't Caleb Thorn. It was the alchemist, a hired killer, and Julian Croft was the man who had paid him. Miles felt a chill crawl up his spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. He had been played. From the very beginning, he had sat in Croft's sleek office, a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. He thought of the wooden bird with the letter J burned into its base. Julian, a gift from a beloved uncle to his precious Luna, a man who had smiled in her face, held her hand, and then hired the man who would watch her drowned. The injustice of it was a physical thing, a coiling serpent in his gut. The conflict was no longer just about finding a killer. It was about tearing down a king, Julian Croft wasn't just a murderer, he was a pillar of the community, a celebrated businessman, a man wrapped in layers of wealth and power that made him seem untouchable. Miles drove back to the city, the scenery a blur. His mind was racing, connecting the dots. Croft's initial interview 7 years ago, his careful performance of grief, his suggestion of the eco-terrorists, a perfect red herring. His calculated patience, waiting years for the dust to settle before resurrecting his grand project. It was a masterpiece of cold-blooded cruelty. But Croft had made one mistake. He hadn't counted on the GoPro. He hadn't counted on a cheap, durable little camera surviving 7 years at the bottom of a river, holding the one piece of evidence that could burn his kingdom to the ground, the face of his hired demon. The problem was, the face was still a ghost. Without a name, without a connection to Croft, the theory was just that, a theory. A story that a high-priced lawyer would shred in court. Miles needed more. He needed to find the link. He started digging into Croft's life with a new, ferocious intensity. He pulled his financial records, his phone logs, his travel itineraries from around the time of the disappearance. He was looking for a needle in a haystack, a single payment, a single call, a single deviation from the norm that could connect him to a killer. For weeks, he found nothing. Croft was meticulous. His life was a fortress of plausible deniability. The frustration was eating at Miles, turning his waking hours into a relentless grind and his sleep into a nightmare reel of Luna Harrison's terrified eyes. He was becoming consumed, his world shrinking until it contained only 3 people, a dead family, a powerful monster, and a ghost he couldn't find. The pressure from the department was mounting. Sheriff Brody, while sympathetic, was getting heat from the higher-ups. "Just close it, Miles," he'd said, his voice weary. "Rule it an accident. The family's gone. Let them rest." But Miles couldn't. He owed them more than that. He owed them the truth. He felt a growing sense of isolation, the case becoming a personal crusade. He was the only one who had seen the video. He was the only one who carried the weight of Sarah's screams, of Liam's desperate struggle, of Luna's silent, bubbling plea. He was the hidden witness, the one who had to speak for the dead. One night, working late, staring at the grainy image of the killer's face on his monitor until his eyes burned, he noticed something he'd missed before. A tiny detail on the man's neck, just below his ear, a tattoo. The water and the poor resolution made it nearly impossible to decipher, but it was there. A small, dark shape. He zoomed in, enhancing, sharpening, fighting the pixels. It looked like a scorpion dot. It was a long shot, but it was something. A new search parameter. He started cross-referencing known associates of Croft, employees, contractors, anyone in his orbit. With databases of tattoos from prison records and military service, the search was tedious, a digital crawl through thousands of files. Days turned into a week. He was on the verge of giving up, the scorpion tattoo feeling like another dead end, another ghost. He was about to shut down his computer when a new file popped up on his screen. It was a military record. A man named Declan Rourke, dishonorably discharged, a former Special Forces operator, an expert in demolitions and covert acquisitions. And there, in his file photo, was the face. Older, harder, but unmistakably the same man. The same dead eyes, the same sharp jawline. And on his neck, just visible above his collar, was the tail of a scorpion tattoo. Miles felt a jolt of pure adrenaline, a feeling of triumph so sharp it almost hurt. He had him, Declan Rourke, the alchemist. The ghost had a name. He immediately ran a financial trace on Rourke, and there it was. The needle in the haystack. A week after the Harrisons disappeared, a shell corporation owned by Julian Croft had made a single, untraceable wire transfer of $250,000 to an offshore account. An account that, after a dozen more layers of digital laundering, led directly to Declan Rourke. The link was forged. The chain was complete. Julian Croft, the grieving partner, Declan Rourke, the killer, Liam, Sarah, and Luna Harrison, the victims. Croft's cruelty became even more monstrous in its clarity. He hadn't just wanted his partner dead, he'd wanted him erased. He'd wanted it to look like a tragic, random accident, a family simply swallowed by the wilderness. He'd paid a premium for a clean job, but he hadn't counted on Sarah Harrison's final, desperate act of journalism. He hadn't counted on her pointing that little camera, not at the trees or her daughter's smiling face, but at the face of her executioner, preserving his image for eternity. The sense of betrayal was staggering. Liam Harrison had trusted this man, had built a dream with him. Sarah had likely considered him a friend. Luna had known him as Uncle Julian. He had woven himself into the fabric of their lives, all while plotting their annihilation. Miles now faced a new, more dangerous conflict. He had the evidence, but Croft was not some common criminal. He was a titan, with an army of lawyers and connections that reached into the highest echelons of the city. A direct confrontation would be professional suicide. Croft would bury him in litigation, discredit him, and paint him as a rogue cop, obsessed with a 7-year-old tragedy. The video was powerful, but a good lawyer could argue it was inconclusive, the face distorted. The connection to Croft circumstantial. The injustice of it all escalated from a personal quest to a systemic battle. The very system Miles had sworn to uphold was designed to protect men like Croft. Their wealth and influence were a shield that deflected truth. Miles felt the full weight of his position, a small-town detective against the king. He knew that if he made a move and failed, the truth would be buried forever, and the Harrisons would die a second death. He started feeling the pressure from unseen forces. A formal complaint was filed against him for harassment by Croft's legal team. Sheriff Brody was forced to put him on administrative leave, pending an investigation. Miles was being boxed in, isolated, the walls closing in. Croft was using his power to neutralize the threat, just as he always did. He was making the problem detective, Miles Corbin, disappear. Miles sat in his small apartment. The case files spread across his dining table, the face of Declan Rourke staring up at him from a photograph. He was off the case, disarmed. He felt a profound sense of despair, a fear that he had failed. He had the truth in his hands, a truth so explosive it could tear the city apart. But he was gagged and bound by the very system he served. He looked at the photo of the Harrison family he kept on his desk, a picture of them on a beach, smiling, alive. He saw Luna's bright, innocent eyes, and he knew he couldn't let it go. If the system wouldn't allow for justice, he would have to find a way outside of it. The witness could no longer stay hidden. The time for silence was over. The plot twist didn't come from a dusty file or a new piece of evidence. It came from the past, from a place of forgotten grief. Miles, now on leave, and officially off the case, was packing up his desk when he came across the evidence bag containing the small carved wooden bird. The bird with the letter J on its base. Dismissed it as a tragic trinket, a gift from a monster to a child he planned to kill. But as he held it, feeling the smooth worn wood, an idea sparked, a desperate long-shot connection. He remembered something Anya Sharma, Sarah's best friend, had said. That Sarah had been scared, that she felt she was being watched, that she'd promised to drop the story. What if she hadn't? What if she had found her proof? The smoking gun that linked Croft to his criminal network. But knew she couldn't keep it in her house or office. What if she'd hidden it? Sarah was a journalist. She thought in terms of evidence, of preservation. The GoPro had been an accident, a fluke. But a smart, terrified woman would have a backup plan. A dead man's switch. Miles stared at the bird. It was just a toy, but it was solid wood, heavy for its size. On a hunch, a wild, electrifying guess, he took it back to his apartment. He examined it under a bright light, running his fingers over every millimeter of its surface. He found no seams, no hidden buttons. He was about to give up, to toss it aside as another dead end, when his thumb pressed down hard on the base, right over the burned J. He felt a faint click. His heart stopped. A tiny, almost invisible seam appeared along the bird's back. With trembling fingers, he carefully pried it open. The bird split into two perfect halves. It was hollow, and nestled inside, wrapped in a small piece of silk, was a micro SD card. This was it. This was Sarah's ghost, her final story. He didn't have access to the station's equipment anymore. He went to a 24-hour electronics store and bought a cheap laptop and a card reader, paying in cash. He felt like a fugitive. His paranoia mirroring Sarah's, he took the laptop to a grimy motel room on the edge of town, a place where no one would look for him. He locked the door, drew the curtains, and with a deep breath, he inserted the tiny card. A single folder appeared on the screen. It was labeled Alchemist. He clicked it open. It was a treasure trove of meticulous, damning evidence. Sarah Harrison, in her final weeks, had done what Miles had failed to do. She had unmasked the ghost. There were audio files, secretly recorded conversations between Julian Croft and his associates. Miles listened, his blood running cold, as Croft calmly discussed laundering money through the Blackwood Reserve Project. He talked about bribes, about blackmail, about making problems go away. His voice was the same smooth, reasonable tone he'd used with Miles in his office, but the words were pure poison. There were scanned documents, bank statements from offshore accounts, forged permits, a detailed ledger that connected Croft's real estate empire to a notorious international crime syndicate. Sarah had found it all. She had mapped out his entire criminal enterprise. And then, there was the final folder. It was labeled Rourke. Inside was a single password-protected video file. Miles's hands shook as he tried to guess the password. He tried Alchemist. Access denied. He tried Blackwood. Denied. He tried Liam's name, her name, the project name. Nothing. He sat back, frustrated, his mind racing. What would she use? Something personal, something meaningful, something that only she, or someone who truly knew her, would guess. He thought of the family in the car, singing songs. He thought of Luna's excitement about the secret waterfall, the one from the storybooks. He typed in a new password. LUNAS, waterfall. Access granted. The video file opened. It wasn't from the GoPro. The quality was different. It was shaky. Filmed from a distance, through trees. The audio was faint, distorted by wind. But the image was clear enough. It was the clearing by the side of the narrow road, the spot where the Harrisons' car had gone into the river. The video showed the dark green pickup truck parked behind the Ford Explorer. Two men were standing there. Julian Croft and Declan Rourke. Sarah must have followed them. She must have known something was going to happen. She'd hidden in the woods, her camera a silent witness. The audio was terrible. But Miles could make out fragments of the conversation. No loose ends, Declan Croft was saying, his voice sharp, authoritative. She's been digging. Her and her husband, they're a liability. The kid, too. Rourke's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. The voice of a professional. There was a pause. Even on the grainy video, Miles could see Croft's hesitation, a flicker of something conscience. No, it was annoyance. The child was an inconvenience. The whole family, Croft said finally, his voice cold as ice. Make it look like an accident. Tragic, a community in mourning. I'll handle the narrative. Rourke gave a slight nod. It'll cost you extra. Just get it done. Croft snapped. He got back into his own car, a sleek black sedan parked further up the road, and drove away, leaving Rourke standing there, waiting. The video ended. Miles felt like he was going to be sick. This was the full conspiracy. The final damning proof. Croft hadn't just hired a killer, he'd been there. He'd given the final order, standing just yards from where his partner, his friend, the woman who looked up to him, and the little girl who called him uncle, would be murdered. He had chosen his moment, orchestrated the ambush, and then driven away, leaving his demon to do the work. The stakes had shifted seismically. This was no longer about a single murder. It was about exposing a kingpin, a man who had built an empire on crime and sealed it with the blood of a family. The SD card in his hand was a bomb, capable of causing a scandal that would not just ruin Croft, but would implicate some of the most powerful people in the city. The tension cranked to an unbearable level. Miles was no longer just a disgraced detective. Hugh was the sole keeper of a truth so dangerous it had gotten the Harrison family killed. Croft's paranoia would be absolute. He knew the car had been found. He would be worrying about that GoPro, but he had no idea about this second card, Sarah's real legacy. Miles knew he couldn't go to the police. Croft had moles everywhere. The moment he turned it in, the evidence would disappear, and so would he. He was completely, terrifyingly alone. He looked at the laptop. At the face of Julian Croft, smiling and confident in a photo Sarah had included in her files. The public face of a monster, and he knew what he had to do. The justice for the Harrison family couldn't happen in a courtroom, a place Croft could control and manipulate. It had to be public. It had to be undeniable. It had to be a cinematic, emotional explosion that would strip away Croft's power and expose the rot beneath. He made a copy of the SD card. He mailed one to Anya Sharma, Sarah's friend, with a note explaining everything, telling her to release it to the national news if she didn't hear from him in 24 hours. A dead man's switch of his own. Then, he took the original card and walked out of the motel. He had a plan. A wildly dangerous, insane plan. He was going to attend the grand gala for the reopening of the Blackwood Reserve. The very project that had cost the Harrisons their lives. It was Julian Croft's coronation. His moment of ultimate triumph. Miles was going to turn it into his execution. The Blackwood Reserve Gala was the apotheosis of Julian Croft's ambition. Held in the Grand Lodge, he had built a cathedral of soaring timber and glass overlooking the very valley he had fought to conquer. It was a monument to his victory. The governor was there. Senators, tech billionaires, media moguls. The air hummed with power, money, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Julian Croft moved through the crowd like a king in his court. Accepting congratulations, his face a mask of magnanimous success. He was untouchable. Miles Corbin, dressed in his only suit, which felt tight and cheap in this opulent setting, slipped in through a service entrance. He was no longer a detective. He was a ghost, just like Sarah had been. In his pocket, he carried the micro SD card, a tiny sliver of plastic that held the power to burn this entire world to the ground. He made his way to the main hall's audio-visual booth. It was a small glassed-in room overlooking the stage, manned by a single bored-looking technician. Miles showed the man his old badge, banking on the residual authority it carried. "Detective Corbin, County Sheriff's Department," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We have a security situation. I need to override the presentation system. It's a matter of public safety." The technician, wide-eyed and intimidated, nodded and stepped aside. Miles slid into the chair. He had only minutes before Croft took the stage for his keynote address. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. He inserted the SD card into the master computer that controlled the massive screen behind the stage. He queued up the two videos. First, the GoPro footage, then Sarah's secret recording. He set it to loop. He could see Croft making his way to the podium, basking in the thunderous applause. The man's smile was radiant, triumphant. He had won. He had killed, and lied, and waited, and now he was reaping his reward. Miles took a deep breath. He looked at the photo of the Harrison family he had taped to the inside of his jacket. "For you," he whispered. Just as Croft tapped the microphone, the lights in the hall dimmed. The applause died down, replaced by expectant silence. Croft cleared his throat, ready to deliver his victory speech. Miles hit play. The huge screen behind Croft flickered to life. But instead of the slick corporate logo for the Blackwood Reserve, the audience was met with the fisheye view of a little girl's laughing face, Luna Harrison. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Croft froze, his smile faltering as he glanced over his shoulder at the screen. He saw his goddaughter's face, and a flicker of pure, cold panic crossed his features. The GoPro video played. The idyllic family drive. The singing, the laughter. The audience was captivated, confused, watching this intimate found footage home movie. Miles let it play. Let the warmth and love of the Harrison family fill the vast, silent hall. He wanted the crowd to love them before he showed them how they died. Then, the dark green pickup appeared. The first impact, the jolt. The screen on stage mirrored the chaos. The camera pointed at the floor. But the audio was pristine, pumped through the state-of-the-art sound system. Sarah's scream, Luna's terrified wail, Liam's desperate shouts. The room was utterly silent. Now, the air thick with horror. The guests were frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, their faces pale in the flickering light from the screen. They were no longer at a gala. They were inside that car, trapped with the Harrisons. Croft was paralyzed. He stared at the screen, his face ashen, his mask of success shattered. He was watching his own crime, broadcast to the most powerful people in the state. The sound of the car hitting the water was a deafening roar that made people jump in their seats. Then, the submerged, greenish hellscape. The rising water. The desperate, gurgled shouts. The image of Luna, trapped, her silent scream, echoing in the minds of everyone present. And then, the face. Declan Rourke's face, pale and demonic, filled the 20-foot screen, his dead eyes staring out at the horrified audience. A collective gasp swept the room. The video went black. For a moment, there was only the sound of heavy breathing. Then, before anyone could react, Miles played the second file. The screen now showed the grainy footage from Sarah's camera, the clearing, and the two men, Julian Croft and Declan Rourke. Croft's voice, sharp and cold, filled the hall. "No loose ends, Declan, she's been digging. They're a liability." The camera in the hall zoomed in on the real Julian Croft, standing on the stage, his face a rictus of disbelief and terror. The man on the screen, his younger self, was condemning him. The kid, too. Rourke's voice asked from the speakers. The entire room held its breath, waiting for the answer from the man on the stage. The man they had been applauding just moments before. The whole family, the recorded voice of Julian Croft declared. Make it look like an accident. It was a confession. A death sentence. Delivered in his own words, the spell broke. A woman screamed. Someone else shouted, "Oh my God." The room erupted into chaos. People were scrambling for the exits, knocking over chairs, their faces masks of disgust and horror. The media moguls in the front row were already on their phones, their expressions a mixture of shock and predatory glee. This wasn't just a story, it was the scandal of the century. Julian Croft stood alone on the stage, bathed in the light of the screen behind him, where the video of his confession played on a loop. His kingdom had crumbled in the space of 10 minutes. His name was no longer a symbol of success. It was a synonym for monster. Miles slipped out of the AV booth and walked calmly toward the stage. The chaos parting around him, he felt a strange sense of peace. The roaring fire in his gut finally banked. He walked up the steps to the podium. Stopping a few feet from the broken man, Croft looked at him, his eyes wide with a dawning animal terror. He finally understood. He hadn't been haunted by a ghost. He'd been hunted by a witness. "It's over, Julian," Miles said, his voice quiet but carrying in the sudden lull as people stopped to watch the final confrontation. Security guards were rushing the stage now, but Sheriff Brody was with them. He'd clearly been alerted by Anya, his face a grim mask of understanding and resolve. He wasn't there to stop Miles, he was there to make the arrest. Brody reached them, his eyes locked on Croft. He didn't need to say a word. He simply pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click as he fastened them around Julian Croft's wrists was the loudest sound in the world as they led him away. A disgraced king stripped of his crown, Croft's eyes found Miles one last time. They were filled with a venomous, uncomprehending hatred. "Who are you?" he mouthed. The question of a man whose airtight world had been breached by an unknown force. Miles didn't answer. He just watched him go. He was nobody. He was the man who had listened to the dead. The screen behind him still played the loop. Luna's laugh, Sarah's scream, Julian's confession, a perfect, cinematic, and brutal delivery of justice. The river had given back a story, and Miles Corbin had made sure the whole world heard it. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The Blackwood Gala Massacre, as the tabloids dubbed it, broke the internet. The footage, both the GoPro's raw terror and Sarah's damning spy video, went viral, an inescapable testament to Julian Croft's evil. His empire imploded. His powerful friends deserted him, scrambling to distance themselves from the taint. The crime syndicate he was tied to was exposed, leading to a cascade of arrests that reached across the globe. Sarah Harrison's final story, released from its wooden tomb, had done more than avenged her family. It had cleansed a city. Declan Rourke, the alchemist, was apprehended within days, tracked to a private airfield in Idaho, attempting to flee the country. His dead eyes showed a flicker of surprise when the FBI swarmed his jet. He had believed himself a ghost, but Sarah's camera had given him a face, and Miles's obsession had given him a name. He offered no confession, no resistance. He was a professional to the end, accepting his failure with the same cold detachment with which he had accepted his fee. The trial was a formality. The video evidence was absolute. Julian Croft, stripped of his tailored suits and his army of lawyers, was a shell of a man. He sat in the courtroom, listening to the audio of his own voice, sentencing a child to death, his face a blank mask. He was convicted on 3 counts of first-degree murder, and a litany of other charges that would ensure he would die in prison. Miles watched it all from the back of the courtroom, a spectator to the justice he had wrought. He had been reinstated, offered a promotion, hailed as a hero, but he felt no triumph. He only felt the weight of the silence that came after the explosion. When it was all over, he drove back out to the Skagit River, to the spot where the Ford Explorer had gone in. The air was cold, the trees bare. Winter was coming. He stood on the bank, the water flowing sluggishly, its surface a dark, unreadable mirror. The river had kept its secret for 7 years. Now, the secret was out, and the river was just a river. Again, he thought about the Harrison family. He had never met them, but he knew them more intimately than some of his own relatives. He knew the sound of their laughter, the cadence of their voices, the texture of their final, shared terror. He had carried their last moments for months, a sacred, terrible burden. He had given them justice, but he couldn't give them back their lives. He couldn't erase the image of Luna's face pressed against the glass, or the sound of Sarah's last choked sob. Justice felt like a poor substitute for a life unlived, for songs unsung, for a secret waterfall never reached. He saw a flash of movement on the far bank. An older man was standing there, watching him. It was Caleb Thorne, the eco-warrior. He gave Miles a slow, solemn nod of acknowledgement, a silent understanding passing between 2 men who, in their own ways, had fought the same monster. Miles nodded back. He turned to leave and saw someone else waiting by his car. Anya Sharma. She was holding a small, framed photograph. It was the picture of the Harrisons on the beach, the one he had kept on his desk. "I thought you should have this," she said, her voice soft. "Sarah would have wanted you too. She always believed in the truth. She would have been so grateful that someone was willing to listen." He took the photograph. "She was the real hero, Anya. I just delivered the message." "A message?" "In a bottle," Anya said, a sad smile touching her lips as she looked at the river. It just took a while to wash ashore. They stood in silence for a long time, 2 strangers bound by a shared grief for a family they loved. The legal battles were over. The monster was caged. The scandal was fading into history. All that was left was the echo, the quiet, haunting space where a family used to be. Miles eventually got back in his car and drove away, the photograph of the smiling family on the seat beside him. He knew he would never forget them. They were a part of him now, a reminder of the cost of truth, and the profound, terrible weight of a story that had to be told. His last stop was the cemetery. He found their graves, a single shared headstone under a large oak tree. Liam, Sarah, and Luna Harrison. Beloved, the stone was new, the grass around it still fresh. Someone had left a small carved wooden bird at its base. He stood there until the sun went down, the sky turning a bruised purple and orange. He didn't say a prayer. He just listened. Listened to the wind in the trees, to the distant hum of the highway. Listened to the silence. A silence that was, finally, peaceful. The GoPro was just a piece of plastic now, its memory wiped clean, its purpose served. But the emotional echo of its recording would linger forever, a haunting reminder that even after 7 years of darkness, the truth can find its way to the surface. And sometimes, it's brought to you by a ghost.